everyone. Thank you for coming here and also sticking around for the last panel of the day. I know we just got done with TikTok stars and like really cool digital content creators. And this one is going to be a little bit more technical, a little bit more legal, but we'll try to keep it as interesting as possible because this is where trans identities, intersex identities really have to fight, which is legal space, legal rights, and legal recognition. We have a prolific set of speakers that Rohan has already introduced, but I was speaking with them on a personal level last night and earlier today, and found some really interesting tidbits about each of them that I would like to also point out. For instance, Arita has been on a case with Clifford Chance. It was a landmark case which recognized intersex identity on the US passports, and that was very recently. And I think that is a very important thing to include in his introduction. Jannat was actually part of the steering committee when the trans bill was being consulted, the trans bill that later became in 2018 the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act in Pakistan. So she has some really important views on that because that's a huge discussion today. And Zamir, there's so much that Zamir has done, but I would like to talk about their short films and the stellar performances in Marathi plays, such as Kurup and Hijra and Tutak, that have been performed in Maharashtra, but which we'll be privileged to see later today after this panel, so stick around for that. It's also interesting that we have panelists here from 3 countries of India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, because trans rights are actually at different stages in each of these countries. While India has passed the Trans Rights Act, the act itself and the rules have both been challenged in many petitions across the Indian High Courts and even the Supreme Court. Akkai, I don't know if she's here, but one of her petitions is at the Supreme Court right now. The rules were actually introduced without any consultation with the trans communities in the pandemic in 2020. Pakistan, as we see, has also passed the Trans Rights Act in 2018. It was one of the more progressive ones in the South Asian countries, but is now facing resistance from a very strong lobby, about which Jannat is going to talk to us about. And very interestingly, in Sri Lanka, the legal recognition for trans identities has come about through an administrative action. And that's a very different route from legislation, and I would really like to hear Arita talk more about that process and how it came to be. So over to you, panelists. When you speak about the legal recognition of trans identities in your countries today, please do tell us about the status of legal recognition today and how it's playing out with civil society and the courts. How are the courts responding to this? Are they taking up are they intervening in any form of judicial intervention, for instance? And how does this status impact the life of trans persons or daily life of trans persons in each of these countries? Shall we start with Jannat and then to Arita and round it up by Zamir? So we have a lawyer, non-lawyer kind of thing. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, FNF, for inviting us, and hello everyone. I won't say ladies and gentlemen. I want to include everyone. So I want to bring this change. Let's address people by saying hello everyone. Hi lovely people, rather than saying ladies and gentlemen. So I think it's very crucial time for our country when you're talking about rights. As Aisha Mughal shared that before we were coming and discussing the positive aspects and how progressive legislation we have in Pakistan, but now unfortunately the situation has been worse. Even we are the people who were on the front line when this legislation process was going on. Nayab was there, I was there, we were part of this whole meetings were happening at federal. And you won't believe we were not allowed to sit inside meeting, and there were male and female who were deciding our future and what do we need, what kind of rights do we need. And we claimed our spaces, and we came from different cities. We didn't have any single penny from the donor at that time. It was all the struggle from our hearts, and we just wanted to have a legal rights for transgender, which is a very suppressed community. So actually at that time we claimed our space, and some person, the politician, presented the copy of Indian bill, which was in India, and it was enforcing the medical requirement before having legal gender recognition as a transgender person. We said that it's about us, rather than, you will decide, let's ask us that how we are feeling and what are our rights. So that was the first and turning point. And later on, when we came, we were not in the favor of that legislation, which presented by Babar Rawan. And we came up with the amendment bill. And for amendment bill, we have a connection with the grassroots community members. We went there, and when we were talking about the bills, they were thinking it's an electricity bill or a water bill. They didn't know what is the bill actually. You can check the level of sensitization. So we have to go at grassroots level and translate into our local language. Like, as you know, the Hijra and Khwajasra community, we have the, same culture, South Asian language like Farsi Kalam. We have our own dynamics, which was developed after British colonial law. So actually, we were trying to know that we have to include each and everybody's voice, so nobody's left behind. When the legislation becomes the law, so nobody blame us that you did not approach us, you did not include us. So basically, our right name is Protection of Transgender Rights. That is really needs to understand. Why? Because it was giving the rights of your education, your health, right of buying property, inheritance, even we have access to public spaces, right to vote, and right to contest election. I will come later when I'll, relate this point, this political part, right to contest and right to vote, So this thing is also one of the barrier, which is this legal right and the civil rights. We did not demand any rights of the marriage. Because, at that time when we were including the rape definition, and if somebody raped transgender, it is not considered rape in Pakistan. So we raised voice that it should be considered rape, and equal punishment should be given to the culprit. So they were trying to remove that clauses. So they said it's very early age, don't demand so many things. By they, I mean the steering committee members, which includes different political parties and the head of different stakeholders like from the medical, from the Council of Islamic Ideology. So these all stakeholders were present, but they were not ready to listen. But when we were trying to share our challenges through our stories, the painful stories, how a person is treated and died when as a trans person goes into hospital, nobody's ready to keep in the male ward, nobody's ready to keep in the female. And Alicia's death happened like this. Her body was kept outside washroom and doctor didn't come. So she died in one day and night. And before they were not ready to listen that why do you need a separate healthcare system? But when we shared this kind of painful stories, so at least they were able to listen, and they said, okay, we can include this clause that enabling and safe healthcare setting. So this is one example. Like this, we give them practical examples and stories, and that's how we were able to get this bill passed after more than 1 year struggle. And now it's been 2022, and it was passed in May 2018, when we were very happy that we can have self-perceived gender identity. And I must share this point. There was one point when there were all religious clerics and the head of Islamic ideologies, they were sitting in front of us, and we were the only people who were ready to face them. This row was transgender, and this was the head and Islamic leaders. So at that time, I did not see any NGO or any allies or any stakeholder to come and face them. That was the community itself to defend and to present their logic. And that's how we made this benchmark in the history. So this is the situation that we did not demand the rights of marriage. Why? Because we know that this thing will happen. They might attack our community later on. But later on it happened, and our assumption and our risks that we were assuming, that happened in reality. And they are saying, the people who have signed petition against our legislation, so they said by using this Protection of Transgender Right Act, any male can go to the NADRA office for identity card and get a female card, and female can have a male card, and they can get married. I'm really ashamed and sorry to say nobody who call themselves supervisor of our religion, who are the head of our religion, and who are the right wing of our political party and current government. So they did not bother to even read a bill or a law which is passed single time. Each time whenever we and our key activists are facing the this religious leader who are extremists, so they are attacking on us, but when we come up with solution and logic, they are not ready to listen us. So currently our whole legislation, which was giving us civil rights, and after that we were having a lot of progressive implementation. It took time, but in 2018 the law was passed, but the rules was developed in 2020. But at least we had a protection center. We were seeing transgender on the mainstream. I myself is the first lecturer in Punjab who is teaching in university. I'm MBA gold medalist. So if we were doing progressive thing, and also I'm the founder of first Transgender Pride, happened in 2018. So if we were doing so much progressive thing, I think at this time our whole movement has been challenged, and we are just trying to be safe. What we'll be talking about the implementation, what should I talk? I don't know. But this time we have been so much reversed into our movement. We are so much into stag that I will ask further questions from you as allies, as a global movement. How should we take care about rest of things? But this is the current situation of our legislation, which we have put our efforts, our lives to get passed.
Thank you. Over to Aretha.
Thank you, everyone. And I know it's the last session for the day. I'm going to be speaking about the law. It's not always the most interesting topic, just because it can be so technical, but I'll try to make it as engaging and interesting as possible. Today, I actually want to touch on how Sri Lanka introduced gender recognition through means other than passing an act of parliament or by going to a Supreme Court to assert the fundamental rights of the trans community. Now, when we look at South Asia and when we look at many countries in the world, the recognition of gender has always been done through the process of either a new law or the judgment of a court. But in Sri Lanka, the trans community, especially thanks to the work of incredible people like Bhumi Harendran, were able in our country to introduce gender recognition through an administrative process, a government circular. So in the Recognition of Persons Act, which is about identity documents and birth certificates and your passports, etc., there is scope within the legislation for your identity documents and your citizenship or your birth certificate to be amended. And the Registrar General has the power to issue regulations or administrative instructions on how amendments to your official documents can be made. Now, this is actually a very powerful tool which we realize that we have in our existing legislation. And when you actually read a lot of the existing legislation in many countries on registration of persons, the possibility of amending official documents is there in most of those legislations as well. It is not an unusual thing to find. And in Sri Lanka, because even homosexuality still remains in practice a criminal offense, we still have the colonial era penal codes which do criminalize same-sex consensual relationships. We thought that using even the courts or the parliamentary system might not be the most conducive. That there should be a better, more alternative, less confrontational and less controversial method to introduce gender recognition. So the transgender community, especially National Transgender Network, in its engagements with the Human Rights Commission, spoke with the Ministry of Health of Sri Lanka and the Registrar General of Persons. And using these three institutions, came up with a procedure for gender recognition by way of administrative action. So what happened was that the Health Ministry decided to issue a circular and a process for recognition of gender. That does include meeting with a psychiatrist, but it does not include recognizing or classifying a trans person as suffering from gender dysphoria. So the guidelines actually requires that the process of recognizing a trans person's gender must follow the World Health Organization guidelines on trans identity and also the World Professional Association on transgender health. So it was taking it was not seeing it as a mental disorder, but as a procedure on how gender identity should be recognized. Now, I know there are two sides of the debate on this. There is one side which thinks any form of medical intervention or psychiatric intervention is unnecessary. And self-certification is the way forward. Personally, I do agree with that. But in our consultations with the trans community, there's actually a lot of support for psychiatric intervention. And the arguments put forward by members of the trans community is that gender recognition is quite a daunting process. The hormonal treatments, the surgical interventions, the psychological mental health impact of having to affirm one's gender in a society that remains largely transphobic and homophobic does have mental health repercussions. And that there is a benefit the members of the community see from using a psychiatric or psychological process in order to affirm their gender. So once that process is completed with the Ministry of Health psychiatrists, and this is not like a years-long or even months-long process. There is no timeline included. It is sometimes, as Bhumi has said, it can be, you go for one meeting with the psychiatrist, you say that your gender is different to the sex assigned to you at birth. The psychiatrist then issues you with a gender recognition certificate. So it is quite quick in that way. And then the trans person is also then provided support through the state. In Sri Lanka, healthcare is free, including any hormonal treatments or any surgical interventions that's required for gender affirmation. That is done through the state free of charge. And that further psychiatric or psychological support is also offered by the state, if required. And then once the gender recognition certificate is given to the trans person, they're able to take that to the Registrar General of Persons, and the Registrar General of Persons will then change your birth certificate and issue you with a new national identity card, and you can then also apply for a new passport. So it's actually quite a really innovative process that was introduced with really not much fanfare, no controversy. You didn't have to go behind any politicians. You did not have to experience trans persons being dehumanized and mocked through very homophobic parliamentarians, especially that we had at that time. And yet, the community was able to achieve gender recognition. Now, that doesn't mean that this is the ultimate desire of the community. Having had gender recognition for the last 6 years now, there are, of course, issues that we have identified. And I Pro Bono and our lawyers have been working very closely with the National Transgender Network in conducting island-wide consultations with the community to understand the issues, the grievances, any challenges with the gender recognition process, especially in practice. You know, how are you actually treated? How are the doctors actually treating you? The public officials. You know, law and guidance and procedure might say something, but that's not going to change homophobia or transphobia. And other more practical issues of being trans in Sri Lanka. And we've been having those consultations and using that feedback to prepare and draft a new bill for protection of trans persons and their rights. And actually, we wanted to base that bill, especially from what Pakistan achieved, because that's a really incredible piece of legislation. And we have used the Pakistani legislation as sort of the backbone framework of this bill. But we did not obviously and cannot take a top-down approach as what has happened in India, but a more bottom-up approach where consultations first start with the trans community, and then after we've had those consultations, we created a skeletal draft bill. Then we had consultations with the Ministry of Justice and lawyers, and then following that, we then had sensitization campaigns and discussions with the media to let them know what the bill is about, so that wrongful interpretations or ideas of the bill does not get disseminated. We're still working on the bill. It's still at a very nascent stage, but I think we've done an incredible amount of work so far to get it where it is. Now, that of course still doesn't mean that I think working on the bill has shown the sort of gamut of issues the trans community really faces and suffers, most of it which is silenced. Now, in Sri Lanka, as a lawyer, and especially through the work we do at I Pro Bono, we've had some really incredible interventions to protect trans persons. Despite there being gender recognition, there have been several instances of police abuse and harassment towards trans persons. Now, unlike in Pakistan, I'm not sure what the situation is in India, in Sri Lanka, a trans person can actually legally marry. They can marry their opposite sex, opposite gender partner. And the legal precedents to establish that was actually one of the cases which we undertook at I Pro Bono, where a trans man who had legally changed his gender went on to marry his cisgender wife. And the parents of the cisgender wife complained to the police that their daughter was kidnapped or abducted by this man, even though it was consensual. And this is a very regular complaint we see all the time made from parents and family members of an LGBT person, that their child has been kidnapped. These are not children, these are, of course, adults well into their 20s and 30s. And in that particular case, the man was arrested by the police. He was also subjected to vaginal examinations conducted by judicial medical officers. This is something which also I Pro Bono we exposed to the media about 2 years ago, and there was a lot of local and international attention that Sri Lankan police and judicial medical officers were conducting forced vaginal and anal examinations on LGBT people. These are all cases which we worked on. And in this particular case of the trans man, he was actually stripped naked in front of other doctors and personnel at this hospital, and fingers were inserted in his vagina without his consent. And when he had screamed, the doctor actually said, "Next time I'm going to put a firecracker inside that." And they use this evidence to say that actually this trans man is not a man and is actually a woman pretending to be a man. This is a lesbian homosexual relationship, and this marriage is illegal. And the police filed criminal charges against this man based on that. And we defended him successfully in court. We informed the court there is a gender recognition process. The court recognized it, accepted it, And we said, well, since this person is a man, he can legally get married without any objection to it. And the court agreed and accepted it and dismissed the case. So that was, a really good example of a early stage intervention, which is also able to set some kind of legal precedence on the rights of trans persons. We can get into more detail later, but looking forward to engaged discussions. Bhumi already has a question even before question time.
Yes. To get this, identification. So we were refusing to have third gender identity because, to be very honest, in Sri Lanka we don't have third gender culture. We never seen that. So the gender stereotype that we have come through, we actually spit it on that meeting as well. Now I'm kind of worrying about it. So now only we are getting to know about like gender diverse and different identities. So in our system, we are still accepting the transgenders also, even who's going through the process and becoming a man or woman.
Used in Pakistan to attack the act. So I think it all ties in.
So do we get the extra minutes that she took?
Zamir, all the time is yours.
I'm a little chaotic today as far as what I'm going to speak is concerned, because I was also listening to the other panelists and I was wanting to also kind of build my thoughts around what they have said. He also said that since it is about law, it also tends to become a boring discussion. So maybe I'll also talk about a story that I'm reminded of. It's a story written by a German author called Kafka. And the story is called Before the Law, Vor dem Gesetz. And in this story, you have a villager, a person from village coming to the doors of the law. And there is a watchman standing at the door. And this villager comes there and he's very happy. He says that I have heard that the law is for everyone and law is there, and he wants to enter the door. He wants to go inside in the building. But the watchman says, no, you cannot go inside. No, I'm not going to let you go now. I'm not going to let you go now. So he interprets that maybe I'm not allowed to go inside now, but maybe later. So he decides to wait. And he waits there. And he tries everything that he can in his life to convince the watchman to let him inside. So he bribes him, he tries to talk to him, he tries to humor him, he tries to become friends with him. And years pass by, but the watchman doesn't let him go inside. And at the last moment of his life, he's about to die, he has a question to ask. He says, now that I'm dying, please let me ask you this one question. And that one question that he asks is that, why is it, if the law is for everyone, why is it that no one other than me came here seeking the law? And then the watchman answers saying that, okay, I'm going to do a charity with you. I'm going to answer that question for you since you're dying anyways. He says, idiot, this door was meant only for you. And now I'm going to close that door, and that guy dies there itself. A very weird and queer story, I would say, and it leaves people confused, and people go on interpreting this story for years and years. And I was reminded of this story also because how the law or the language of law works, and that is going to be my submission today. I'm going to talk about how the language of law works discursively with bodies, how bodies are codified into bracketed identities only to give them the rights that they are actually already entitled to. So if you look at the Constitution of India, it starts with the word we the people. And if it starts with the word we the people, that we is gender neutral, is neutral of sexuality, and then you still go on to have, or rather you still need to go on to have a transgender act bill or gender specific laws, etc., etc. Because the society is not yet ready the way the Constitution would want them to be. So when it comes to transgender rights in India specifically, now we've had the Nalsa judgment, and we have also had we also have the Transgender Act since 2014, I think 2019. But it was not executed at all because there was lots of protest coming from the community itself. And also, there was a committee which was appointed which would help this get executed. But that committee didn't do anything for the past whatever years. And this is why now, in India, right now, there is I call it the transgender season is going on. Why? Because all NGOs in India are running to the government to get some kind of funding and to get some kind of projects approved so that this transgender bill gets executed in smaller, minute parts of projects, whatever possible. Because the committee didn't do anything, now it is now left to the NGOs to execute. And that's why everyone is having conferences in India. Like in Pune, we've had at least 6 conferences in the past 3 months, and bigger conferences. One of the conferences that I would want to refer to, only to underline the language of law, how it is problematic, and that conference was arranged by the Election Commission of Maharashtra. And the program letter that they had prepared for this program read, India's democracy is the largest democracy, the oldest democracy, but the transgenders have never participated in this democracy, and now we want them to participate in this democracy. Hence, we are taking the initiative to help them participate in the democracy. Now, this is the language of the law. The law is saying that, or as we saw it in the story as well, the right is there. The door is for you. You have to go and open it. No? We are not going to reach out. We are not going to make it accessible for you. No? It is the question of accessibility, as she also talked about language being a problem. That law has to be translated into local languages so that people actually know what is happening in the transgender bill. Most of the transgenders in India don't know that the transgender bill, which is now translated in Hindi by the government, is actually calling transgenders bisexuals in Hindi. So the whole transgender bill becomes a bill for bisexuals. And no one has, of course, protested against it because no one has read it. Because it is in English, no? So the access was never there, no? So the law is kind of a guarantor of rights, yes, but on the other hand, it is this patronizing, benevolent identity codifier. No? It brackets people into identities. You will have these rights only if you agree to a certain identity. And then I will come to the third point. What could be the answer to this kind of politics of liberal capitalism? It is liberal capitalism that wants you to be codified into identities, because then it will open up possibilities of smaller, minute markets for each and every identities. But at the end, it is capitalism, because not everyone is going to have access to that market. Only people who can afford those markets are going to have the benefits of that market. So you will be alienating people from each other, you will be creating different identities, and in the name of diversity, you will be having a celebration or a party or a... Now, LGBT is an orgy that heteronormative people love to have, you know, nowadays. It is a celebration that people love to have. These are the sexually frustrated people because they have been living in the binary, you know. And now it is, now it is very interesting, the LGBT. No? In the spirit of what Dr. Carsten Klein said today morning, that in 10 years, probably, we are hoping to have a scenario where we should not be needed to talk about these identities anymore. And I'm going to just underline that by saying that to achieve that kind of a scenario in politics or in law, we will have to embrace transgenderism as a characteristic of all human beings. So what I'm appealing all of you to do is to move from transgender to transhuman. No? Because the question is, why are our bodies sexuated at all? I mean, why do we even start with sex? Because if you look at the problem of LGBT, what law is doing with human rights is actually only healing the symptoms of it. And it is not looking at the roots of the problem. And the root of the problem is sexuating bodies. Why are bodies sexuated at all? If they were not sexuated, you will not have problems for the intersex. I mean, intersex people are also going through trauma only because there is this whole binary world in front of them, right? But if we were taught to live without such sexuation, probably sexuality would also not become an issue anymore. I know we have to also talk about people who are having problems in the grassroots reality, no? So that I don't sound just idealistic. I know that is also happening. What do we do with that? No? And that is where I'm reminded of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who was the head of the drafting committee of Indian Constitution. He himself came from a lower caste, struggled a lot in his life, felt that he was an apartheid all his life, and he felt that the root of caste system in India lies in the religion called Hinduism, which is why he decided to move away from Hinduism, and he offered to follow Buddha at the end. So if we look at the three moves that Ambedkar does are also very informing for our politics. I will end in a minute here. Please please bear with me. So three moves that he does. First move is that of what would you call positive discrimination. Positive discrimination is where you accept people, you codify them, you accept them in whatever identities they are embracing, and you guarantee the rights that they were deprived of. Now that is the question. The question is not about the universality of rights, rather that of deprivation. People were deprived of certain rights, which is why we have to now positively discriminate them and give them those rights. This is a strategic intervention. This shouldn't become the rule of the law. This shouldn't become the ultimate rule. This is just an intervention for a certain tenure. Once you do that, Ambedkar parallelly was also making second move, which is called the annihilation of caste. So he was also wanting to annihilate caste forever and completely. And which is how I'm also looking at the queer politics now. So if we look at transgenders, we should accept them as the vantage point for the rights that they were deprived of. So we use them as vantage points. Yes, we do positive discrimination, and we give them the rights that they were deprived of. I mean, the judges also in India said that we owe an apology to them. History owes an apology to them. So in that spirit, positive discrimination. But the second move that we should, you also asked how should we go about it globally now. So I think the answer lies in the fact that maybe we should also think of annihilating sex, gender, and sexuality. How would that annihilation of sex, gender, sexuality look like? Now that is also something that we should now globally, idealistically work on. And the third move that Ambedkar does is actually a move that he did here in Kathmandu in 1956 in November. In his last years, he actually gave a talk here on Ambedkar and Buddha and Marx. So he was very much agreeing to the notions of Marxism, because they were talking about rights, because they were talking about deprivation of rights, etc. But he said, what is going to inform our future? What ideas, what notions are we going to then rely on once we have equality, once we have done the equity and equality of people? And for the future of the society, Ambedkar was proposing Buddha as the figure, because Buddha's values are not the values of God or religion or whatever. Buddha's values are liberty, equality, and fraternity. No? It is about friendship. It is about love. No? So I think compassion, empathy. No? So I think those are also the values that I would attach to queer politics today, and which will take us from transgenderism to transhumanism, no? Which will underline the trans moment of each of us human beings. Thank you.
Mentioned that in your presentation that a need for a separate healthcare system or this separate system for trans people or for the LGBTIQ plus community. With that, I just wanted to ask you about the repercussion of having a separate system, because a lot of people want to identify within the binary. So that's one question. And the second thing, how would you ensure that there's anonymity and confidentiality and security when you are creating an entire different system? So that's just a question to Jannath. The second question is for Arita. And so my question is very straightforward. When you talk about psychiatric intervention or medical intervention, do you think, okay.
Can you speak up?
Oh,
Yeah.
so you talked about a psychiatric medical intervention in terms of Sri Lanka. And I wanted to ask you, do you see it as a support to mental well-being of queer people, or do you see it as a verification of their gender identity? And in your presentation, you kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, lean towards it being support to mental well-being and preempting that you'll say it's a support to mental well-being as asked by the community member. But you also mentioned that this support is not long-term and it's very fast-track. So I would understand that it's just an additional hurdle and not actually mental well-being or support to mental well-being. I would wanted to ask what's your take on it? And without taking much time, I just wanted to ask Zumeer, from your presentation, it's quite clear that the legal horizon is quite unstable or new and has a lot of gray spaces. So in that space, how would you, as a forefront of shaping the future, someone who's there, how would you ensure that a lot of these people who are taking up these for example, citizenships in various things, or a gender marker, are ensured that they have the safety. For example, in Nepal, if I may not take that long time, that after 2011, people were allowed to take citizenship in third gender category. However, now it's more like if you want to take it as within the binary, you're allowed to. So the legal horizon is always changing and unstable. So how would you ensure that people who actually are the forefront risk taker are also, they do have a safety net as well, and that they don't take up these legal documents, which again would put them in more trouble. For example, in Nepal, when third gender identity third gender identity marker was given. Third gender identity marker was given. There wasn't any other, it was not recognized anywhere else, not even in the airport. So anyone who had that gender marker as third gender were now more in trouble of not being able to access any resources. So how would you ensure that people who are taking these risks also have some safety net? Thank you, and I'm really sorry.
Actually, these are the mindset of the people who, when we claim our rights, they said, why do you need something separate? If you just move in any country, sometimes there are, for example, if you take example of a school, there are boys medium and girls medium, and then there is co. And they never said, why do you want something separate? But, there should be always all kind of possibilities, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, and it's about the personal choice. So likewise, the medical, when we were talking about the medical, we also demanded the same criteria which is required for the male and female. For example, when we go for the NIC, National Identity Card, in our country, and it's everywhere, you never ask anybody to take off dress and prove that you are the real male and to prove that you are a real woman. But when this medical things and criteria occurs, why there is a different criteria for a transgender person? And where is their respect and dignity? And even in our religion, it's a very, they say that women and man and all human, they should hide their private body parts. And what kind of religion they are trying to endorse and treating us in a discriminatory way and criteria for identify. And then they say that God has decided your gender and all. When we ask them, you give proof that you are the real man. In the last few days, in the panelist, one mullah and the cleric was seated next to me, and he said that these persons should be tested and it will be easy for us to understand that these are the real transgender or not. Then I said, Mullaji, we have a doubt you are not a real male. You should give a proof that you will give a birth and you will prove yourself to be a real male. What is the criteria? Then he started making noise and he left the program in between. So I said, why, if I ask you this question and you feel offended, just imagine if a person gone through this whole criteria which you are deciding and trying to be our God, then what will happen with us? Why this is so offensive if I'm just asking? And when you will be trying to treat people in this way, how they will suffer?
I'll just quickly answer on the psychiatric support question. So the government psychiatrists have two roles in the gender recognition process. One is to issue the gender recognition certificate, and the other is to provide the psychiatric support or the psychological support that a trans person may need. So the role of issuing the gender recognition certificate can be done quite quickly. As Bhumi has, in our discussions, she's informed me how sometimes this is done almost immediately. You go and meet the psychiatrist, and then you affirm your gender, and then your gender recognition certificate is issued to you. So that role stops then. And then comes the role of providing the psychiatric or psychological support as a person goes through the gender affirmation process, especially during taking any hormonal treatments or if any surgical requirements are needed. And now also just to add, in Sri Lanka, you do not need to take any hormonal treatments or have any surgical interventions in order to have your gender affirmed. That comes actually, if you want to, it's a choice that's left to you, that comes after the gender recognition certificate is actually issued to you.